So now we're entering into 2022. So remember, in the beginning, we said there was events that happened pre-election, during the election, and post-election. So now we're entering into the time that's more leading into the election because by the end of 2022, it was known that I was planning on running for mayor. So let's start right off the bat in 2022. A Courier Times article dated October 17, 2022, titled City Budget Pulled Down by $6 Million Insurance Fund, begins like this. The City of Newcastle ended 2021 with more than $8.6 million overdrawn, according to the State Board of Accounts. After the clerk treasurer, Brenda Grider, stated that the health insurance fund should be taken care of in June of 2020, over 2 years later, the deficit had grown to $6 million, so almost $1 million more after they said that it should be fixed within a couple years. Councilman Aaron Dickens stated, "I don't think the appropriate amount was ever budgeted. We, meaning the city council members, never were made aware of the difference between what was needed and what was budgeted." Less than a month later, in a November 8th article titled City's Debt Remains in Focus, the Park Board president and Newcastle resident Patty Broyles is quoted as saying this: "I was very surprised at the last council meeting that the budget was not mentioned. And then I got home the next day and opened the paper and were $6 million in the red due to insurance." Councilman Lynn Perdue added, "I read the article too." Then he said, "Before we voted on the budget, I directly asked about where 2 years earlier we were $5 million in arrears, or that's when they were $4.9 million behind." So on that discussion, Perdue says, I voted for the budget. And when I read in the paper that we were $6 million in the red, it's too late. But I have to tell you, I was kind of blindsided. So again, a couple years later, there's that word again, a council member was blindsided. The article goes on to say City Council President Rex Peckinpah, he acknowledged that the debt is approaching $7 or $8 million, but said Grider had submitted a plan to the State Board of Accounts that the state feels will move us to a righted ship. Okay, so again, the conversation's beginning to change, coming closer to the election year. The mayor concurred that the finances are, in quote, trending in the right direction. So here's some things to note about 2022. The health insurance was $1 million further in the red after the elected body discovered the deficit amount in 2020. Councilman Aaron Dickens stated the appropriate amount was not budgeted and the council was not made aware. Councilman Lynn Perdue was blindsided as he read about the city's health insurance deficit in the newspaper. Councilman Rex Peckinpah acknowledged the growing deficit, but added that he feels that if the submitted plan is followed, it will move us to a righted ship. And then Mayor Greg York concurred that the finances are trending in the right direction. So there's a couple things to note about those points. As I had announced that I was considering running for mayor in 2023, the public conversation and the comments became more cooperative. Though it was stated that the finances were trending in the right direction, the city of Newcastle actually overspent revenue in 2022 by $1.1 million. And then I discovered through Gateway, the Gateway public website, that they overspent revenue for governmental activities by $3.2 million in 2023. So the trend was not going the right direction. Again, there was positive words, but the data reflected a different picture. So then we move into 2023. So what happened here? So won't go into, there's a lot of stuff that was said. But I'm only going to point out a few things. Don't want to drag everybody through 2023 again. So in 2023, I brought out many of the quotes, comments, and data through the campaign, but things took a different tone among the incumbent elected officials. Nearing the election, in an article written by Councilman Rex Peckinpah himself, he stated this. He wanted to set the record straight. Then he said that I was giving out misinformation, half-truths, and old information, and quote, in an attempt to get elected. Then addressing his former accusation of unethical spending, he stated this. The State Board of Accounts found absolutely no issues in terms of missing or misspent money, adding that I, talking about me, was sinking to a low level and making a mountain out of a molehill. He goes on to say many other things about me and wraps up his message by saying this. The truth is, I do trust the mayor. Remember, he said that because just a couple years earlier, he made it very clear he did not trust the mayor. And actually called him a deflector in his own words and said that he was not a leader, and stated that he had said that many times. But now he's saying the truth is he does trust the mayor. So some things must have changed between 2020 and 2023. Another truth is I do not trust Clay Morgan. As my opponent, Mayor York, remained fairly quiet and actually non-confrontational, City Councilman Peckinpah wrote another piece on November 1st. This is just days before the election. The election was on November 7th, about some information that the mayor had previously submitted. I think he put that out on October 30th, 8 days before the election. Councilman Peckinpah says this, for those who do not take the paper, I wanted to post what Mayor York placed in today's edition. This is the truth. The city is in the black. The mayor's opponents will twist this to fit their own selfish narrative, but the city is doing well. And Greg, Mayor York, has worked hard to make Newcastle a better place than when he started. Look around, and you cannot deny that. I think the final statement, again referring to Mayor York's piece, Newcastle is on the move. Let's keep the momentum going, should resonate with those who love our city. I'm actually going to stop there, and I'm going to show you the piece that was put out. I had posted this earlier in preparation for doing this particular video. But let's look back to that piece that was submitted by the mayor about 8 days prior to the election. So let me pull that up here. In this piece it says this, and I will be pulling this up. So here it is. Let's look at the top. The truth is, contrary to what some people would like you to believe, for their own benefit, in the past 12 years, the city of Newcastle has never overspent what we have brought in from our property tax revenue, which is interesting. I don't know necessarily what is meant specifically by we haven't overspent from our property tax revenue, but the city had definitely overspent some things, and I'll show you that in a minute, or tell you that in a minute. Then he said this, the general fund has never ended the year in the red during this administration. That's true. I actually never said the general fund had ended in the red. The issue is all the funds. So the general fund is just one of over 100 different funds that is in the category of what is called governmental activities. Governmental activities is all the workings of the city government minus stormwater, wastewater, and your water utility. Those three, stormwater, wastewater, and your water utility, are all paid for by you. You pay those bills. Those those departments do not get funded through taxes. They are funded on their own through the city or through the people in the city, through your utility bill. Okay, so I never said general fund was in the red. However, I will tell you, and it's public record, that in governmental activities they did overspend several times. Actually, overspent more than they brought in per year. So the bottom line is we have finished, and this is where it gets he tells the truth, but it gets misleading. Bottom line is we have finished each year in the black. We are self-insured, and we do owe ourselves around $8 million. That's the deficit. Again, it was $8 million at the time. It ended up being $9 million. We do not owe a company, a bank, or any other business that amount. They didn't, but now they do because they borrowed money in 2024 to pay the bills. The city's general fund has always, again, general fund has always ended each year of my administration in the black. And then he says this, along with all the other funds as a total. Okay? True? Actually, yes, because he's including your utilities, because those technically are included in the grand total of city funds. So here are the totals we have ended up with each year. All the figures can be verified on the State Board of Accounts website. And then he lists 2012 through 2022. All of them positive, all of them in the millions. Is it true? Yes, it is true. Because the grand total has ended every year in the positive. They did not overspend. Well, I take that back. There was actually some total overspending too at times, but I won't even get into that. But anyways, it is true that grand total always ended in the black, grand total. But here's, again, this statement was made in 2023, right before the election. But all the while this statement was being made, 2023 was about ready to end in its worst financial position ever since the mayor took office. So it's misleading. So let's look at governmental activities. All those years that they were talking about how they were in the black, or how they had money on hand, which is true because they included utilities. There is a lot of money that goes into your utilities. All right, a lot of money. So let's look at just what's called governmental activities. It is 100+ different funds that the city has to operate with for governmental everyday activity, minus the utilities, minus the water plant, minus the wastewater plant, and minus the stormwater fund. Okay? When you exclude all the money that we've paid into the utilities, Newcastle in 2012, when Mayor York first took over, we did not overspend tax revenue. Again, he mentioned we did not overspend property tax revenue. However, the governmental activities is funded through property tax, income tax, your will tax, grants that the city receives. Multiple different sources of revenue come into governmental activities. All right. And if you look it up on Gateway, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. All the funds that are under governmental activities, then there's stormwater, then there's wastewater, then there's your water utility. 2012 did not overspend revenue. However, the second year in office, in 2013, we overspent revenue for governmental activities by $390,217. 2014, we overspent revenue by $537, $103. 2015, we overspent revenue by 1.4 million. Okay, so how did they continue to remain in the black? Well, when we started 2012, when the mayor first took office, he began with 3.9 million on hand for governmental activities, so almost $4 million. Okay, so then we were able to overspend for a while without depleting the entirety of the checkbook, if you will. 2000 then, so there's 3 of the first 4 years we overspent revenue for governmental activities. 2016, 2017, 2018, back on track. We did not overspend revenue for governmental activities. 2019, we overspent revenue by $2.9 million. In 2020, there was no annual report submitted, though this information could be requested from the city. I haven't done that, but you will not find 2020 report on Gateway. 2021, we did not overspend revenue. However, the trend, when things are trending the right direction, we begin to overspend again. 2022, we overspent revenue for governmental activities by 1.1 million. 2023, while the election was going on, while we were told everything was doing so well, we actually overspent governmental activity revenue by $3.2 million, which was one of the worst years ever. So then that leads to 2024. We started 2024 with the lowest balance in governmental activities that we had. So the beginning 2024 was the worst financial year we've experienced since Mayor York took office. Again, this is after everything was going very well. We started out with $950,571.49 to begin the year in governmental activities in 2024. That's where we borrowed 3.3 million. And I leave out the 1 million that we borrowed from stormwater because that was paid back. The 3.3 million is paid back over, I think, a 10-year period of time. 2024 ended with 3 million on hand for governmental activities. We borrowed 3.3. We ended with 3. So had it not been, it seems, as I do my counting, this is where maybe somebody could fact check me, maybe somebody could correct me on this. But if you take what we borrowed and what we ended with, we actually would have overspent governmental activity revenue again for the 3rd year in a row. So this is why I was making all the points that I was making in the election in 2024, is because we were being told that things were great, but you could clearly see by the city's own data, things were not great. Things were actually going the wrong direction. So during an October council meeting discussion concerning the upcoming budget, again, this is the budget right before 2024. This is the election year still. This is when they're discussing the budget during the election year. So again, Park Board President Patty Broyles requested that the city share, or that the council share, the city's financial expenses throughout the year in 2024. To which Councilman Peckinpah replied, so Mr. Peckinpah stated 2 years before, 3 years before, that he felt a responsibility to the public for the financial well-being of the city. And I agree with him. Though he didn't have the authority to oversee the spending. He did have a felt he did have a responsibility to let the public be aware. And again, I agree with Councilman Peckinpah. However, when this statement was made in 2023, prior to the election, he said, I think technically, according to the statute, the mayor is supposed to do that ever so often. That's correct. The mayor is supposed to present at least one time a year a financial health status to the council. In 2020, he said, quote, our job is to be a fiscal representative of the people. When Ms. Broyles asked about the health insurance fund remaining a problem and requested for the city to see what can be done, Councilman Peckinpah replied, quote, and I think the mayor's doing that because that's his purview. We're available for input, but that's his prerogative. So again, we're pointing to the mayor. It's the mayor's responsibility. Is it? Yeah, he's right. Though the health insurance fund ended 2023 with a $9 million deficit, and 2023 spending was again over $3 million past revenue, we were told all was well, and the 2024 budget passed quietly after the election. I found that year interesting to observe because what we had been told up to 2023, I know I sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, but we were told to ignore the past information because it was old. However, simultaneously, while we were being told everything was great, things were actually becoming much worse, which brings us into the year 2024. Just a few months after passing the 2024 budget, the city borrowed $1 million from the Stormwater Fund so they could meet payroll obligations. This happened shortly after it was said that I was misleading the people and Newcastle is on the move. Just a couple of months later, more financial problems arose, with the council pointing toward the mayor. In April 10th, 2024 article titled City Borrows $3.3 million to Cover Expenses states this: by the end of the half-hour meeting, the city council voted to sell more than $3 million in new bonds to make sure the city can cover the next round of paychecks for its employees. Again, Ms. Patty Broyles expresses concerns about the health insurance impact on the city finances, to which Council President Rex Peckinpah replies, certainly we, the council, need to know information, but we are not the ones that determine what insurance plan we're on and what the premiums will be. How much is budgeted for the insurance? That's the mayor's responsibility. We don't do that. True. Then he goes on to say, that's his job by law. That's not our job by law to help him make decisions on insurance. Later in the meeting, Councilman Jerry Walden asked a Baker Tilly representative, looking down the road, how many years out are we? Wanting to know when the city of Newcastle will be back on solid ground. Just 6 months prior to asking when Newcastle will financially be back on solid ground, we were told of how great a job everyone was doing governing our city, and we were financially stable. Jason Simler from Baker Tilly stated, right now, because of the cash flow, we wanted to get this done as quickly as possible, talking about borrowing the money, to make sure we can meet cash flow for the month. Councilman Jerry Walden stated, the mayor's going to have to be very careful. He's got some really hard decisions to make because these other cities are able to, it's unbelievable what they're able to come up with. It's going to be a tight wire walk. In his reference to what other cities are able to do, this part I can only assume. I can only assume he is referring to how other cities our size in Indiana are doing much better financially. A week later, another article titled Citizens Share Concern About City Finances. It starts out like this. The city of Newcastle does not have enough money to cover payroll this month. The City Council has approved $3.3 million in new debt earlier this month to shore up the finances. Mayor Greg York said Monday that he is working on changes to reverse the budget deficits, especially in the city's self-funded health insurance account. This debt will be paid back through property taxes, which I assume is another reason why the mayor put out a post to try to gain support against SB 1, which would lower property taxes. In 2024, Newcastle residents experienced an increase in property taxes, water usage fees, wastewater fees, and higher income taxes as the city of Newcastle attempted to correct this financial problem that we were told to ignore during the city elections. As things begin to fall apart, Council President Rex Peckinpah made a public statement on Facebook, and then it was printed in the Courier-Times on April 11th, 2024, concerning the immediate financial problems. Again, notice the pattern that has developed. It's a pattern, according to the data, according to the quotes, it's a pattern of inconsistency. Here's what he stated. These are in his own words. Most people have known for quite some time that our finances have not been in good shape. I and other council members have talked to, some might say we have confronted the mayor about the issue. A few years ago, we had our insurance agent at a meeting. He told us that if the mayor would have budgeted the amount of money for insurance that he suggested, we probably would not run a deficit in the insurance fund. So again, I probably don't even have to point this out. Do you see what's happening? Before the election, everything was the mayor's fault. During the election, everything was great, and I was the problem. Now it's after the election. Now nope, it's the mayor's problem again. We've known for quite some time the city has been in bad financial shape. So after he says that the mayor was told to budget the appropriate amount, he goes on to say this, again, in Mr. Peckinpah's own words. That has seemed to have fallen on deaf ears from the mayor, who is responsible for the budget. At that time, as well as other times, we were told by several people that we should leave the mayor alone. And maybe we should have, because we could legally do nothing to because we could legally do nothing to stem the spiraling financial deficit. We, talking about the council, recently found out that the city would not have enough money to meet payroll and pay the bills going forward. The council's only options were to do nothing, which would hurt employees and citizens, or approve the bond, borrowing the $3.3 million. That is why we had the special meeting Monday evening. We needed to get the ball rolling. Then he says this. The answer is yes. The city council had to intervene to pass legislation to allow for a bond so the city can obtain money just to pay the bills. And as he began to answer this question from a lady that asked, why is our city in financial trouble? Councilman Peckinpah wrote, the answer is because of overspending and under budgeting on the part of the mayor. This lady also asked, are local taxpayers, property owners, and city utility customers going to be paying for all of this? Councilman Peckinpah answers himself, quote, I think we all know the answer to this one. We are in bad shape. And it is going to take the executive branch of the city, the mayor, being a leader and making some tough decisions. 2024 ended with the passing of the 2025 city budget after having worked through some issues. After working with Baker Tilly, the Courier-Times reported this: Newcastle's elected officials breathed a small sigh of relief Tuesday night about the city's finances. Our current clerk-treasurer stated this: They, referring to Baker Tilly, said this budget is just fine. However, it was still recommended that the city of Newcastle keep running lean and mean in 2025. It is also important to note that the city of Newcastle did not overspend revenue in 2024 because, again, as previously stated, the $3.3 million borrowed helped assure that. So the city ended the year with $3 million on hand for governmental activities after borrowing $3.3. And Council President Rex Peckinpah actually voted no on the 2025 budget, which is an interesting vote. It's 2025. Here we are again in March, 3 months in, facing consequences of the past creeping up on us. It was recently announced that the city will be laying off approximately 6 EMS employees, and in the process, the remaining employees will see approximately $5 plus an hour pay cut because they'll be working more hours for the same amount of pay. It is still uncertain what the next couple of years will bring, but there are signs. One thing to remember is that we are once again being told, according to Mayor Greg York in his State of the City address during the Chamber of Commerce lunch, Newcastle is thriving. Again, see the pattern? Newcastle's on the move. We're doing great. Things are well. Look around. You can't not deny that. Newcastle, the statement for 2025, right before announcing that we are going to be laying off employees, is Newcastle is thriving. Okay. This one was a little tougher for me because it brought back a lot of memories, and it's interesting to see how some people said one thing and now they're saying something completely different. And I humbly say this: I still mean everything I said from 2022, 2023, 2024, and right now. Every word, every piece of data, everything. I still mean it, and I still believe it. I haven't changed my mind. My intention for taking time for this, because there's some people wanting to know, Clay, what's the point? Why do you keep dragging us through this? Because I admit some people are tired of hearing it. But it's important. This is where we're at. We've been told things that are contrary to where we've landed. And so you, us, we, the residents of Newcastle, need to know this information going forward, because so many have just trusted what we've been told. And I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, everybody talks about not trusting politicians, not trusting elected officials, right? Trust but verify. If you say something, take accountability for what you say. Mean what you say and back it up. Okay? Anyways, sorry about that. So my intention for taking time for this is with the hope that many more people will begin to accept the reality of our situation and prepare themselves physically, mentally, and spiritually for a rough road. because there's going to be a lot of people that act out of emotion and say things that are derogatory, unpleasant, and actually presenting factual information is not the problem. Presenting factual information and using critical thinking actually is what's needed to solve the problem. Transparency, openness, honesty, the truth, facing the reality of where we actually are. That is how you solve problems. But emotional responses, just getting mad and saying whatever comes out of your mouth, just whatever you think, without filtering it, without recognizing, is this just an emotional response? Am I just mad at the situation and responding out of anger? Or am I using some critical thinking? Am I responding to this correctly? We're going to have to recognize that as we go, because I do feel like, again, we've got a rough road ahead of us. I also hope that several individuals of honorable character and capability will be stirred in their souls to take these issues, take it to heart, and prepare themselves and their family for a potential election run in just a couple years in 2027. Know this: if you choose to run, realize that if you win, you are going to have an extreme amount of responsibility upon your shoulders. It's going to be a heavy, heavy weight, and many, many eyes are going to be upon you to hold you accountable. And the situation you will be coming into will not be pleasant. I realize I'm talking 2 years out. I realize I don't know what's going to happen between now and then. But if you follow the pattern, what I'm saying makes sense. And I'll end with this statement: if you continue to do what you have always done, you will continue to have what you always get.